So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our session today on key building information unlocked with digital retrofit. I'm Maria Hudson, and I'm Group CMO at the Build Data Group, and I'll be your host and moderator for the afternoon. Today, I am joined by James Cannon, who is our Head of Commercial at the Build Data Group, who will spend some time talking about digitising information in one place and why digital retrofit is a key component to digitising in use building information. We're also joined by Jeslyn Joy, who's our Head of Solutions, and he will demonstrate how one platform can help in terms of unlocking building information that supports compliance and building regulations. And then we're also joined by our guest speaker, Gus Carroll, our founder and director at the Safety Case Partnership, who will delve a bit deeper into the purpose, importance, and fundamentals of a building safety case and what is required to mitigate risk. Thanks for joining us today, Gus. It's a pleasure to have you with us, especially with your knowledge and expertise. I know you'll go into a bit more detail about your background during your section, so I'll leave it there for now, but it's great to have you with us. So before I get into the crux of the session, I'll just run through the agenda for today. We'll kick off with a bit about who the Build Data Group is, and then I'll delve a bit deeper into the changing regulation, how it is impacting our industry, and the emphasis on digital information. I'll then hand over to Gus, who will talk about what is required from a building safety case. And then James and Jay, as I said, will talk about painless digitisation and the solutions to support registering buildings and key building information with the Building Safety Regulator and the path to the golden thread. Just for some housekeeping for today, we are recording the session for on-demand purposes. So for those that haven't been able to join, we can follow up with them afterwards. If you do have any questions throughout the session, please do ask them on the chat board or during the Q&A message board, and we'll try to address them as we go or at the end of the session with the panel. We will also be running polls throughout the webinar, so please do provide answers where you can. So, for those that don't know the Build Data Group, let me tell you a little bit more about us. The Build Data Group is a collection of complementary companies that provide best-in-class software and solutions across the REBA stages of the building lifecycle, supporting our customers with digital transformation. Together, our brands have a combined expertise working across the built environment for about 20 years, and the solutions created support areas such as building information management, quality management, digital handover, and building regulation compliance. Some of you on the call today will be familiar with Zootech, which is our SaaS platform and common data environment. And from that platform, we deliver solutions, as I said before, around quality management, regulatory compliance, such as Part L and Building Safety Act, and also build solutions on the path to golden thread. While our Zootech solutions are adopted in a modulated way, it also provides a platform as a single source of truth of data for things like document management, decision-making, inspections, and auditing. Create Master, again, some of you will be familiar with, is one of the UK leaders in handover and structured data, with a professional and experienced team that bring together quality building manuals and documentations for contractors for handover to asset owners at project completion to ensure regulatory compliance. And last but not least, we have Bonbrine Digital as part of our portfolio that provides structured data and building information management and modelling solutions, providing consultancy and information requirements for our customers. As a collective group, we continue to develop and add more capabilities to our portfolio so that we can bring value across our products and also support the construction industry as it embraces evolving technology and regulation. So in terms of our approach, we like to build relationships and partnerships with our customers who are the focal point of basically everything we do, the decisions we make, and everything related to delivering products, solutions, services, and experience. We take a customer first approach, or always put our customers first, and have a customer success team at the heart of our business that is dedicated to making sure our key stakeholders get the solutions that work for them. We have never wanted to really spread ourselves too thinly in terms of what we do, so we're very much about working with customers across the residential sectors, so house builders, developers, build-to-rent organisations, housing associations, and asset owners, providing solutions for regulatory compliance and driving efficiencies. You can see some of the companies we work with here, particularly those that we work with in digital handover and in the retrofit space. And these companies are instrumental in helping us develop solutions that work alongside your working practices and overcoming pain points. So why, and why are we here today? So as all of you probably know, in the last year, we have seen a number of regulatory changes across the UK building sector, with the first provisions, for example, rolling out with the Building Safety Act, which came into effect last year, as well as an updated Fire Safety Act at the beginning of this year, and the subset regulation that has fallen out of that in the higher residential building regulation of 2023. These all kind of follow the review by Dame Judith Hackett, and these regulatory changes have been deemed critical post-Grenfell disaster to deliver a framework for building safety, with a focus on ensuring that building owners and operators take responsibility for the safety of their buildings and that the regulatory system is effective, ensuring that buildings are safe. And as part of this legislation, the government has paid particular attention to building information and data and put an emphasis on digitisation to ensure that the data is not only correct, but up to date across the building lifecycle. But also that means that the documents that are provided are not just making claims in terms of that building safety, but that it's evidencing that a building is safe and that duty holders understand the risk and can manage that risk and control that risk. This should ensure that the right data and information is digitally available for all buildings and that buildings can be maintained and operated in the safest way. And critical information is always available, accessible, and up to date, and that duty holders can make informed decisions around safety and tenants understand the fire safety procedures of the building that they live in. As part of that, the higher risk buildings, so those over 18 metres high, have to be registered with the Building Safety Regulator by the 30th of September, and key building information submitted 28 days later, which I will talk a bit more about in a bit more detail. But all in all, regulatory change has brought about a lot of upheaval, particularly for our sector, and also uncertainty. So the right guidance and the right tech should really provide the ability not only to adjust faster to the changes that we're experiencing, but help us on that path to golden thread that we're hearing about. So what has kind of come out of the Building Safety Act is this subset legislation that came into force, I think, on the 12th of April, that outlines the requirements for the information that needs to be provided in what areas to the Building Safety Regulator. So once a building has been registered, that principal accountable person, so the PAP of a building or a property portfolio, need to make sure that key building information is provided around use. So the principal use of that higher risk building, as well as whether that use has changed and since construction. It has to provide detailed materials, so a description of the materials used in the external walls, as well as the roof, and including layers of insulation. It also has to provide information on fixtures and external wall fittings, so the type of fixtures and material that has been used in the structure, and the main materials that are used as part of the structural design and of the building. And also, there needs to be details around the stories and the staircases, so the number of stories of that building, how staircases are built and how many staircases are within that building, the energy, so the type of energy that is supplying that building and the storage systems installed. And then last but not least, but probably the most important piece, is the emergency procedures. So a description of the type of evacuation strategy that is in place, as well as all the fire safety files, details, smoke control equipment details, and where that building is located and those fire safety procedures. All of this plays a key part in that wider building safety case, which is required for compliance with the Building Safety Regulator and as part of the Building Safety Act, and what Gus will talk through in just a second. However, before I hand over to Gus, we'd like to understand a bit more about, what you guys are doing, or, where you are at the moment with your building regulatory compliance and in terms of registration. So we do have our first poll for the session. And what we'd like to ask is, are you ready to register your high-risk buildings and submit Q building information? So you should see in the system now the poll come up, and you can select one of the choices to your answer. So I'll just give that a minute so that we can see the numbers coming through. I think most of you are getting ready to submit information as part of the Building Safety Act and registering buildings. So I will leave that there with you, but now I'd like to hand over to Gus to talk a bit more about the what, so what that building safety case looks like, and the purpose and what needs to be done. So thank you, Gus. I'll let you go from there.
Thank you very much, Maria. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Good.
Sounds good, thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. So as Maria said, I'm Director at the Safety Case Partnership Limited. I don't have a background in the construction sector, but I have a long background in high hazard sectors, including oil and gas, chemicals and refining, and the nuclear sectors. And until recently, I was chief engineer at Centrica, where I had overall major hazard responsibilities for all of these, for assets in all of these sectors. I chair the UK Major Accident Hazard Strategic Forum, and this is a joint industry government body on major hazard sectors in those above sectors that I spoke about. And this forum sets the future direction for major hazard regulation in the UK. Now, although it is focused on what we call onshore major hazards, such as chemicals, nuclear, refineries, and so on, we have what we call observer status coming in from the biohazards sector and from the building safety sector. And so there's a lot of overlap between what the more mature, established major accident hazard sectors are doing and what the emerging sectors in biohazards, particularly post-COVID, and in the building safety sector. In 2020/21, I led the development of the Building a Safer Future Leadership and Culture Framework, and that was directly at the request of Dame Judith Hackett. And she asked me to work with BSF to develop that framework, which is now fully established, and many organisations are going through the process. And so with all of that background, and recognising some of the challenges that the building sector and high-rise building sector in particular was going to face post-Grenfell, I co-founded the SCP, Safety Case Partnership, in 2021 actually. So just to give a little bit of background to this, the construction sector, and particularly the HRB sector, is not being picked on by anybody. Unfortunately, this sector is the last in a long line of sectors, as you can see in this timeline, that have suffered major accidents. In other words, catastrophic events which have led to multiple fatalities, which have then been brought into a major hazard regulation. And the major hazard regulations, which all of these other sectors, marine, offshore oil and gas, rail, chemicals, and so on, are in principle and structure exactly the same as you are now facing in the construction sector. Fundamentally, the difference that this new regime is bringing in to the construction sector compared to the health and safety regulations that you are very used to and have very successfully implemented for construction site safety is that it changes the regime from a prescriptive or a compliance-based approach to what's called a goal-based approach. And this is really fundamentally important. I'm going to talk about this now. So fundamentally, the safety case regime, which the Building Safety Act has brought in, focuses on two major accident hazard categories: fire and structural integrity. And it requires the accountable person to look at the building as a whole, as opposed to considering individual risks. And as I mentioned, it's not compliance driven. It's driven by this concept, and it might be a slightly alien concept to some of the people on the call, called ALARP, or ALARP, which stands for as low as reasonably practicable. Now, what does this mean? Well, what it doesn't mean is that there's a fixed line above which you're not compliant and below which you are compliant. What it means is it depends, and it depends on the building type, on the situation, and on the specific risks associated with that building. And the purpose of a LARP is to demonstrate that the risk remains acceptably low, as low as reasonably practicable, over the entire life cycle of the asset, of the building. And the test, well established in other major hazards, and which will be applied to the construction sector, is a test of what's called gross disproportionality. Now, that sounds very technical, but what it essentially means is you will need to demonstrate as an accountable person, as an owner-operator of HRBs within scope, that you have brought the risk down to a level below which it is disproportionately expensive to go further. And that is quite different to the regime which you've been operating in now. But as I say, very well established in other sectors. Now, by now, I'm sure it is clear to everybody on the call that in order to achieve all of this, you need a great deal of structured, clear information, which is of a suitable quality, suitable level of completeness, and most importantly, is accessible. And that accessibility is really often one of the most difficult things to overcome, because I'm sure this will be familiar to most people on the call. Building information is often held in many different disparate locations, different databases, sometimes paper-based, sometimes PDF-based, and collecting all that information at the right quality at the time that is required is fundamentally important, but is a non-trivial exercise. So what is the purpose of the safety case? Well, there's nothing really mysterious about it. The safety case is exactly what it says on the tin. It's the case or the argument that you're making to demonstrate why your building is safe, why your building is safe for people to live in it, to sleep in it, to work in it. And in order to achieve that, you basically need to answer these 5 questions. These are 5 pretty straightforward questions, but the answers are sometimes very far from straightforward. And the questions are, what can go wrong in your building? Next question, if it does go wrong, what can happen? Next question, what control measures do you have in place? Smoke detectors, fire doors, sprinkler systems, so on and so forth. Do those control systems actually work when you require them to work? And finally, how do you know? So what can go wrong? What will happen if it does go wrong? What controls are in place to prevent or mitigate those consequences? Do those controls work? How do you know they work? That's what a safety case will answer. And that's what you need to demonstrate to the regulator. Now, each one of those questions is fundamentally reliant on the quality of information you've got. And if you don't have the information, you cannot answer those questions. So how do you go about creating the safety case? Well, fundamentally, the safety case comprises of several different elements. And this triangular diagram or pyramidal diagram tries to explain this. The foundation of it is all of the evidence, the information, the substantiation of that information, and the documentary evidence, which allows you to collate the information, which enables you to answer those 5 questions. So let me give you an example. Let's think of a really trivial example. You might think about fire doors. So fire doors, you would need the number of fire doors, how they've been installed, how they've been inspected. Have those inspections been successful? Have those inspections and installation of the fire doors in the first place been undertaken by a suitably competent person? How do you know that that person is competent? And how do you know that that person's competence is ongoing and valid? Now you multiply that by the number of controls and systems and buildings, and you can start to see that the amount of information which builds up and is required to support the safety case, which is in the orange segment next up, is quite substantial. So the safety case, the orange bit next up, then represents the structured organization of all that information, which essentially answers those 5 questions. And the safety case report, which is different but highly connected to the safety case, the safety case report is the relatively short, relatively non-technical summary of the safety case. It's written for the regulator, but it should be written in a way which is accessible to a non-technical expert. And then the final part, to the top of the pyramid, is the resident summary, an important and specific requirement of the Building Safety Act. And this is a very short summary, often using diagrams or pictograms or simple language, which explains in simple terms all of the major accidents which exist at a particular building, the control systems you've got in place, and in particular, the emergency response arrangements which are in place in order to help those residents make a safe escape if the worst happens. So how do we actually go about doing this and achieving all of this? Well, first of all, the first building block is to collect your building safety information. Too quickly. Is collect the building safety information. And this is undertaken using a building safety gap analysis. Maria went through some of the information from the HRB information regs, and those can be then, if you like, disaggregated into much more specific detailed information. So we collect the information together, and there will inevitably be gaps. And so action will be required in order to fill those gaps. And once we've got the sufficient amount of information, we then go on to the next stage, which is a highly structured approach to what's called HIRA, H-I-R-A, which is hazard identification and risk assessment. Now, within HRBs, we're really talking about 2 major accidents, which are fire and structural integrity. Those 2 things are clearly linked. But within each of those, there are sub-major accident hazards. So you could think about fire within a compartment, fire breaching a compartment, fire breaching the common areas, fire in a plant room, and so on and so forth. And you could think about similar things from structural integrity. So we undertake a hazard identification process, and we evaluate the risks associated with that. So now we can answer what are the hazards and what can go wrong. And there will be gaps, and we will need to collect that, undertake further activities in order to fill those gaps. In some cases, the fire survey might be out of date, or the structural survey might be out of date, for example. When we get sufficient information so we understand the hazards and the risks, we then undertake the gap analysis against the building safety management system. So what is this? Well, at the center of the building safety management system, of course, is your repair, inspection and maintenance system. Highly important and very relevant, but it's not the only thing. I haven't got time to talk about it in detail here, but we also need to think about, for example, how do we manage competence? How do we manage audit and inspection? How do we collect performance indicators so that you know that the building in question is safe on an ongoing basis? And then we collect all that information together and start to build out the engagement strategy, resident engagement strategy, and the mandatory occurrence strategy, reporting strategy under CROSS. And essentially, when we get to the end of those things, which I've galloped through very quickly, they're quite complex and involved, all of the all of the elements 1 to 4 held within the white dotted line represent essentially the evidence and information and the safety case. We've now got everything that we need to write the safety case, which is part 4, and that's a technical authoring process of writing the safety case and get it in a state which can be submitted to the regulator. And then from that comes the residence summary. Now, what's really important to note is that in common with safety case active regimes in other major hazard industries, the regulator does not expect perfection. They fully expect that there will be gaps in the safety case, and that those gaps will be fully reflected in a prioritized action list, which itself is part of the safety case. But remember, if you put an action list of things that you need to do in order to reduce the risk to a LARP as low as reasonably practicable in the safety case, that is a legal document. That is not a wish list. That is not an aspirational list of things you would like to do. Those are firm commitments that the regulator will hold you to account. So with that in mind, I'll summarize before I hand over to James by saying that fundamentally the key deliverables from the building safety regulations regarding the safety case is the safety case report, the residents engagement report and other communications, and the mandatory occurrence reporting process. And I hope that in this brief overview, I've managed to demonstrate that all of these are fundamentally important on the quality, completeness, and availability of your building safety information. And so I'll now hand it back to James.
Yeah, thank you, Gus. Starting now to think about how this key building information comes together, and I think it's helpful to consider the starting point for digitizing that key building information as required to support the evidence for the safety case. So a typical starting point we would see as a fragmented data set. So this data could be in email, it could be in SharePoint, Dropbox, on USB, stored in different platforms, operated or controlled by different parties. And then in addition, each building has a complex supply chain. So a facilities manager would have contractors who would in turn have their own subcontractors, all of which should be generating and updating certification, reports, certification of compliance, etc., etc. And it becomes difficult to understand compliance and the associated risk because the data is inaccessible. So in our view, you need a single digital platform to start to solve that problem. So all parties know where and how that information is stored. And we're talking about large and increasing volumes of data. So as I guess as a business, we've got 4,500 or over 4,500 residential buildings worth of data stored. As Maria said at the top, that's been kind of built incrementally over 2,500 projects. And we've seen a clear trend of rapidly increasing volumes of data that are generated. So some of the newer buildings that we've been involved with, just anecdotally, it's increasingly common to see in the range of 25 to 50,000 records of data handed over from construction into asset management, and so some large projects significantly more. So to make use of that data, so to help to start to collate it in a way that becomes useful to evidence the safety case and in the way that Gus talked about earlier, that data needs some structure. So some of our clients have kind of done that work in terms of developing a comprehensive, granular set of information requirements, that defines exactly what they want, that goes beyond, specifying a list of standards. But actually, most of our clients need some help with that. So we've got a suite of standard templates, informed by both, professional standards, published standards, and legislation, but also our kind of on-the-ground coalface of working with clients to define how best to structure the business, structure the information to meet the needs of their business. And we also have efficient ways of processing that data into a standard template. So we're about 2 years into a machine learning project now, whereby our platform is now starting to understand how to categorize data in the right place, by stripping out keywords, looking for patterns, to help us efficiently get the data from the sources that we describe, the disparate sources, into one place to help start to seed and that safety case process. And by doing that, by using a platform, using tools like machine learning to populate that template, we can start to identify gaps. By looking for gaps in the data, we can then help you to start to analyse risks. And given large volumes of data, we see dashboarding and kind of early visibility, of those of those gaps and of that information as key to making this process as efficient as it can be. And that needs to happen, I guess, both at the building level, but also more holistically for our asset owner clients at a portfolio level as well. So that leads us into our second poll, of which I'll hand back to Maria.
So the poll should be going live now, and that poll is: where is your data stored currently? You can tick more than one option for this, so several choices in terms of from paper-based to hard copies, all the way through to a CDE and multiple platforms. So please do let us know how your data is stored today. So I can see from the results that are coming in that the majority of you either use multiple platforms for your information and data, or SharePoint looks like quite a popular choice for storing data. And still paper and hard copies are still out there. So I guess with the digitization of information, it's probably key that information is put into some sort of digital platform. But to talk a bit more about that, I will hand back to James, who can talk about a little bit about what digital retrofit means, and how we can help you get all your information into that one place. Thank you, James.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. So just to delve into this in a little bit more detail. So we see different users of the information, and whilst the topic of today is how the key building information is required to support the safety case, looking at this slightly more holistically, we would see it as helpful to break it down into different outputs or different deliverables, which might be familiar for a facilities manager or a capital works project team, or similar. So it remains one data set, but we use metadata tagging to help categorize and filter that information. So I'm not going to go into each of the deliverables that are outlined on the screen, as most of these would be familiar to the audience, but just to flag a few key points. So with digital building manuals or digital O&M information, we see this as different layers. So it's the ability to add tags to allow you to sort estate-wide information or per building information, or drilling right down into per unit information. So for example, to be able to isolate all the life safety certificates for a particular apartment, or to be able to call all the photographic evidence for a particular unit to demonstrate that the fire barriers were installed correctly, or looking bigger picture, to be able to quickly search for all the cladding warranties across your portfolio. The ability to apply metadata tags to those records to move beyond a large number of PDFs in a folder structure becomes key, just to help understand the volumes of information, to make sure it's on hand when needed. And then there's also in here, something, the fire and emergency file. So that kind of single summary of, single summary of all the information you'd require to make decisions and set policies and strategies through a fire perspective. To be able to click one button and filter the data set in that way. There's also the ability in here to start to review information. So via a workflow, assign records to individual stakeholders, whether that be a consultant, a designer, or a contractor. So they can provide a time and date stamped audit trail status of that information. So to help bring some rigor in terms of the reviewing and approval of that information. And then finally, the ability for the facilities manager to manage change. So as that information evolves, through things like recertification or updating of warranties and the like, and to be able to do that in a way that's version controlled, to allow you to update, that information. So I guess these are just a few highlights of what we see, or what we class as our digital retrofit service. And I think the next stage was to show you what this would look like in a platform, so you could start to visualize how this information would be structured and presented in a way to meet these requirements. So Jeslyn, over to you.
Just a reminder, while Jez is bringing up the browser for the demo, if you do have any questions or have any insight, then please do share it on the chat or the Q&A message board, and we can address it either as we go or at the end of the session. Thank you, everyone.
Can everyone see my screen?
We can see your screen, but not the platform at the moment, Jez.
How about now?
Yes. Maybe if you can make it slightly bigger, that would be great.
Okay.
Possible.
Yeah. Is it any better?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. So, just a second. So, to start with, right? We have already set the scene up from Gus and from James in terms of the importance of having essential information in place to ensure compliance. And we have also seen the importance as the legislative framework is actually moving ahead, and then the requirements of capturing the right information and making sure you identify the gaps. So what you're actually seeing here on the screen basically is a building manager or an asset owner's view when he logs into the system, right? And he's looking, as an example, he's looking for a sample project. And then he's saying, I want to see what's happening with my building. I want to check, is it relevant? Does it have all the documentation in place? Is it compliant? What's going on? So he goes into Zutec platform, logs in, and then he'll be presented with this landing page, wherein immediately, as you can see here on the screen, that on the left-hand side here, is actually telling you that I'm expecting 1,756 documents. I am at 21.3% compliance. What does it actually mean, right? So what we have here in the system is a mechanism to establish what are your expected documents based on your legislative guidance or your framework, right? And then all those documents are categorized into different sections that you're seeing here on the right, right? These are all different groups and categories that you're seeing here. This is developed on the back of our experience delivering and working with a number of clients across in the UK, right? So instantly, you can see I have got 30% of items that's not received or that's expected. I don't know what they are yet. I know that it's missing in this general building information piece. So I'm thinking, okay, I have information in place, but it's not finished. It's not full yet, right? So I need to go and drill down a bit more and check what's going on, right? Sorry. Hold on a second. That logged me out. Just a second. Yeah. So I'm going to select into the general building information. So this is actually telling me now in that general building information, I have got 710 documents that's still missing or outstanding. And I can click on this go to documents side of things, which is going to sub-filter that data and then going to show me the list of documents that you have received. And then you have documents that are in final stage, documents that are not received, and then you're able to see what those documents are. And as a mechanism that we have on the platform, this is going to be an ever-growing, constantly evolving list with metadata. We have the ability to then filter down or narrow this down into individual entities. So for example, I'm looking at the BSA or the fire and life safety element of it. So I'm looking at all these documents. So these are the documents that you saw earlier, which were outstanding. So you can see different pieces of information there, which is still outstanding or missing, right? So this kind of gives you a flavor on trying to define what those items are, and then trying to make sure that if it's not there, then the principal accountable person will be responsible to go and start chasing for the information and making sure it gets updated. Now we can filter it down by strategy documents, we can filter it by manuals, right? So the mechanism here is really simple. We are giving views of the data so that users and the principal accountable person can actually drill down and identify what is going on. So in this case, I can go into anything that is final as an example. And if I click on this URL here, what they're actually going to bring me up here is all the metadata that is tagged against that document. So it's not just the document that's important. We are also talking about the metadata that's going to be part of that process. And what's it also bringing is the actual file that's attached to it. We can open that as a PDF. And for compliance with Golden Thread, you're talking about who reviewed it, when they reviewed it. We have the full audit history of what's going on. So looking at one document and you start drilling down at a granular level, you have the audit log, the actual file, the metadata, all tagged onto the particular piece of information. So that's one part, right? So this is how you can navigate through the system and look at different pieces of information, right? So building, I can go down to building residence manual, and then I can see what's actually assigned, what are the certificates. Everything is as simple as that. Now, what happens is, this is just going through the documents, right? You probably want to understand how compliant are you with different sections or different categories of information that you have captured. So we have this mechanism here called as compliance overview. So once I click on it, so this is the residence manuals I checked on, right? So I'm expecting 64 documents. This is again based on requirements. And then off that, I know there is a workflow that's part of it and showing you that what percentage of it is you have with yourself, right? So I can drill down into that data and then goes down to a document level. And then you can see that I have a residence manual that's put in, it's 50% ready, meaning I have received the document, but I've still not validated it. Because for that information, getting into the system, we also have a mechanism so that you can validate it, right? Because validation is an important point to ensure that you have the right document that's reviewed and that's approved. So that's one of the key aspects of the system that we can do. And where all this actually gets defined is also an interesting piece, because when we start setting out a journey or start working with our customers, each project may have unique requirements, or they will have their own information needs pertaining to a particular project. So we have mechanisms to actually define that, and in the system during our onboarding process, and then we can mark them as applicable, not applicable, or whether they are to be confirmed. So this helps us defining what documentation is required, and then we can look at that as our framework to start working towards achieving compliance to get the overall compliance overview, right? So this is pretty much looking at a building that is in its use phase, and which is also looking at what's happening during that digital retrofit phase, right? So this is that one part. So I'd also like to touch on one other important piece here. Again, this is a sneak peek into what we are coming up with next. this is probably looking at all the REBA stages, right? So this is probably looking at everything to do with the gateway tree side of things. So on similar grounds, it's important to establish what are the requirements for each stage in your building life cycle, right? So it can be different pieces of it. So your information delivery can be defined whether it's applicable or not. And what we are able to do is very similar to how we're doing it for the digital retrofit. We can run compliance on what is expected, and across the REBA stages, we can actually then give you an overall compliance of what's actually happening on your project, right? This is again trying to get the information in time, ahead of time, and making sure that they're all reviewed and validated as you come down to Gateway 3 and ready for the use case, right? So that's the quick and short demo I had today for you guys. I'll hand this back over to Maria.
Thank you, Jez. That was great to see that in action. I will hand back to James, who's going to talk about data in one place and some key takeaways. We'll do a final poll and then open up for questions. So back to you, James.
Yeah, thank you both. So this essentially just summarises this this most recent section of the webinar. So what we've been looking at really is a central platform to keep the data, and the purpose of this ultimately becomes that building information, that supporting evidence required to build that through into the safety case and the safety case report as outlined by Gus. We have a template for doing this, and that's informed by both industry standards that are published and available, with an emphasis on open standards where possible, but also kind of enhanced through our practical experience of having done this for customers. And really, we're looking at this as the start of a golden thread process. That start point being just getting all the data in one place in a structured way, and building from there. And we do this essentially as a fully managed service. So we get the data into the platform for you. So your key challenge would be getting that source data to us, and most of the time this comes from multiple sources, unstructured, and we help you make sense of it. So we use a combination of our team and resource and technology. We mentioned machine learning to do that, but ultimately we deliver a structured data set back to you in the platform. We give you a dashboard that helps you, through lots of different ways, and using lots of different filters, easily identify where gaps are in the information. And then also, because this information's in the cloud, it can be permission controlled to allow you to simply give access to the people that need it, whether that be internal stakeholders, looking at the safety case, or doing projects, or just trying to run the building day to day, or whether that be third parties such as consultants, or ultimately the regulator if appropriate. The idea being is you've got control over who can access the data in a simple way.
Actually, James, on that point, there was a question that came in, and maybe you can answer it now. And that question was around kind of the templates. And I know you just talked about them, and obviously, Jez, you showed some of the templates, but maybe we can dig a bit deeper. And that was, what would be the industry approved template or templates for information management? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, specifically through the lens of this topic, as far as we could see, there are standards that feed into this that start to provide guidance and recommendations for how this information is captured, but there isn't a definitive template for exactly what you need to provide. So as a business, our standard template uses open standards as the core principle. So aligning with standards such as ISO 19650 and Uniclass. So some of those standards that are out there in the industry and widely understood, but overlay them with essentially our experience of working with customers at doing this. So our standard template is a kind of aggregate of lots of pieces of work we've done over the years with customers trying to make sense of their own data. So it's a combination of open standards and our own work on the topic that's that informs our standard template, but it is just a template. It's not definitive. It evolves as our understanding of this topic grows, and it's also flexible. So customers can give us their requirements, and they can be definitive or looser, and we can then use the flexibility of our platform to refine our template to suit a customer's business. So it's a kind of combination of things that inform the template. I mean, ultimately, it's the customer that drives their requirements. We're just there to facilitate it, albeit we help them along that journey using our knowledge and experience.
Thanks, James. I'll let you continue.
So just to kind of wrap up then and summarise, so we starting point for digital retrofit for us is typically lots of different data sources. So we're working with a customer at the minute, just anecdotally, that they have 55 buildings, but those buildings have come to them in chunks on the back of acquisitions. So they bought buildings in batches from other asset owners. So as a consequence, they got 14 different platforms where documentation was stored. So that was their starting point, and our task then becomes standardizing that for them, pulling it all into one place, and help them understand what's missing. The answer is, the answer to that question being a lot. And having that key information helps you start to understand how compliant your building is. So it starts to feed that process of as Gus outlined, that structured process for building a safety case and authoring a safety case report. Ultimately, then to get to the point where you've got an approved compliant building with the regulator. And we want to try and make it as easy as possible. Is this an easy task? No, but we can use tools and technology and knowledge to help make this as straightforward and as efficient as we can. And ultimately, the same with everything we do as our business. We're trying to take the pain away of this as a process as best we can to start you on the path for achieving this golden thread. So I think that's it from me. I guess now let's open it up if there's any questions on the chat.
We do actually just have one poll before we go over to questions. So I think that poll will be going live now. So it'd be good to get your insight. And that question is, what do you need to get ready for registering high-risk buildings and building safety case information? So if you're happy to submit your answers, that would be great. Thank you. I can see the template as being one of the requirements that is coming through, and also having some consultancy around that building safety case. So thank you guys for answering that. Continue to put your answers in, and we'll collect that data at the end, but maybe we can open up for questions now. If anybody has any, as I said before, please do put them on the chat board or in the Q&A section. So there has been a question coming in around why we have called this digital retrofit, and maybe it could be a bit misleading in terms of kind of domestic retrofitting programs. Obviously digital retrofitting, and we did some work around this, didn't we, James, looking at kind of what it meant and that piece around kind of information gathering in a platform, and that's how we perceive it. But obviously this is aligned with, in use higher risk buildings, but we do understand, I think, that there could be some kind of misconceptions around the name, so it's good to get your feedback, because we do know that kind of retrofitting buildings and retrofitting information is two slightly different things. But in our route that we're taking this, it's very much around retrofitting that information for the buildings in terms of the compliance around higher risk buildings that is required to go to the Building Safety Regulator. I don't know if you want to add to that a bit more, James.
No, I think it's a fair point, and certainly something we would take away to reflect on. I think a couple of points of context. This isn't necessarily, this isn't our terminology. This is terminology that's out there elsewhere. Kind of different topic entirely. But if you look at things like digital twins, that kind of concept within that space, that this digitally retrofitting the building. as in, you know, taking the digital data set for the building and enhancing it, or manipulating it, is an established theme. And I guess, you know, a number of our customers refer to it in that way. So there's a couple of points of context, but if that has been, you know, if it has been confusing for some of the attendees, that's certainly something we'll take away and reflect on.
Yeah, most definitely. In terms of maybe this one for you, Gus, in terms of kind of, you know, key building information and that building safety case, is there a difference in what has to be submitted to the regulator, or is it kind of one and the same thing? Obviously, there's this 28-day requirement in submitting information post-registration of the building, but the building safety case is obviously a much bigger piece of work, essentially. So if you could delve a bit deeper into that, that would be great.
Yeah, they're connected, but they're not the same. The information is the foundation. The information is the foundation of the safety case, as I showed on that pyramid. And without the information, the safety case cannot be produced, but the safety case is more than the information. So the information is used to establish what are the major hazards and what are the risks associated, the control systems. We saw in the demonstration in some of the drop-down boxes, some of the topics of the documents. And that's the type of information that's used in the safety case. So they are strongly connected, but they're not the same.
Great, thank you, Gus. And maybe one for yourself, James or Jez, in terms of actually digitally retrofitting building information. You know, there's obviously a deadline coming up in terms of key building information. How long do you think it takes to probably get a building into the platform and that information being useful?
So I'll take that in the first instance. I guess it just depends on the volume and quality of the data. If you're talking about a typical data set, once we agreed the template with the customer, you know, that's something we can mobilize. We can mobilize quickly. I mean, it's days and weeks rather than months to do that as an activity, albeit it depends. You know, one of our customers we've done this for in the last month, the sort of first tranche of data was over 1 terabyte, completely unstructured from lots of different sources. Obviously, that's a kind of different exercise. So yeah, it just depends on what we're dealing with, but this is intended as a sort of quick turnaround, efficient service as we currently see it.
Yeah, I would concur with James on that. It's all about having that information in a centralized place that can be shared with us really quick, right? And then from that point on, getting that into our system, right? So that's the effort that's involved. So it's more so days or weeks than actually months. And this can be prioritized as we move with the implementation side of things. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then maybe one final question, and you might know this, Gus, before we close for the day. Obviously, the building safety regulator is going to have to regulate a lot of buildings. There's obviously thousands of high-rise buildings out there. Do we have any kind of understanding of how they're going to kind of regulate and enforce some of the powers that they have, given the amount of buildings we do have across the UK that will be falling under this?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things to talk about that. First of all, and not that this is particularly encouraging news, but the regulator is not going to provide advice or assistance or consultancy. The regulator is there to regulate. And the two levers that they can pull basically are to reject the safety case, which has obviously got implications in terms of building completion certification and building control, or to prosecute. And prosecute is usually manifests itself in either what's called an improvement notice, which is a legal requirement in the form of a letter with a series of actions which are legally required to be completed by a certain date, or a prohibition notice, which is a bit more draconian, which essentially would only be issued in situations of extreme risk. One of the questions that or one of the points that has been put to me previously is, well, as you said, there are so many buildings, how can the regulator possibly regulate them? And there's two things to say to that. One is it's taking very much a risk-based view. So the information which will be submitted by the 30th of September will be triaged, and each building will be prioritised using a prioritisation grid, which HSE has made available against some key criteria. And then it will start to call in the safety cases on a prioritised basis. And remember, once the HSE calls in a safety case, you can have 28 days to submit that safety case. The second thing is, in terms of capacity of the Building Safety Regulator, the BSR is the fastest growing regulator in the HSE. Stepping away from the regulator for a moment and thinking about it on a societal basis, another Grenfell is the largest single safety risk, societal risk that the government is facing at the moment. And therefore, because of the number of HRBs and because of the legacy of the industry, which was revealed in Dame Judith's inquiry. And so therefore, the BSR is bringing in inspectors from all other parts of the HSE, and they are building up their capacity very rapidly. So I would seriously advise anybody who is hoping that this is all a horrible nightmare that's going to go away one day, and that in any event the HSE don't have the wherewithal or the capacity or the desire to regulate, to really put that to one side. That would be a serious mistake.
Thank you, Gus. That was a comprehensive answer, and I guess it highlights how important this information is, and preparing for this ahead of time. I know we're at the top of the hour, so I will wrap up the session for today. I'd like to thank our speakers, particularly you, Gus, for joining us to talk about the building safety case, which is obviously a highly critical piece of not just documentation, but many pieces of information to bring together in terms of safety. If you do have questions post session, you can reach out to any of us on the session today at Create Master or Build Data, and also Gus. We do have details, so feel free to get in touch. We also can set up demos if you'd like to see a bit more detail of the platform. But I will go ahead and close the session today. I'd like to thank everybody that has joined the session, and again, the speakers for running through that. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Gus. Thanks, James.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jez.
Thanks.
Thanks, Maria.